How's it going, YouTube? Coming today with another video, and today, guys, what to bring you is how to improve the player part 3. Now, I really think this type of video is important, and that's because we never really know what the next best deck is going to be. And for me, what being a better player really means is being more well-rounded. And so what I mean by that is really being able to swap between control and combo effectively and knowing what cards blow out control or combo and how to play around them. So let's say that Flow Under Ease ended up being the undisputed best deck this format. If you were a primarily combo player and you try to play Flow Under Ease, it might seem very daunting because you can't end games in a turn or two. You can't just put up a lot of damage. It's basically just like a gradual game that is gained by using minimal effects, things like Floodgates, and just kind of drawing out the game a little longer to be able to gain that card advantage that you normally would just have in combo. So it kind of works vice versa with control. If the next best deck that you wanted to play was combo and you don't really know how to end games that quick and you want to revert to playing more slow paced, it can get kind of daunting as well. So this is where being a better player to me is really just being more well-rounded, and that's because you can just use either deck effectively, and then you also just know those blowout cards that shut out the deck so you know how to play around them. So this is another thing that I think is really important though, is that you understand even decks like Dragon, for say in combo, use even control cards like Gozen and Rivalry because they use it as a direct counter to their own outs. Things like Dark Ruler, if you get your board blinked and then you flip Gozen, a lot of times they're not siding in back row out for you, so that'll just be a game win in itself. So these are things you have to think about, and they both take attributes from each other. So if you really want to get better at the game, I do suggest that if you are primarily a combo player, to pick up a control deck and at least learn it, learn how to play it, and what really comes with the deck as well. What do you need to play around? What do you need to play to be more effective? What Floodgate can you run? There's a lot of different card choices and aspects that I feel like will improve your deck building skills, let alone because you have to think a lot different when you're playing control versus combo, because control needs to live and it needs to gain advantage and not have its cards cleared, versus combo that can just kind of spit everything out on the board. So they both play very differently. So this is where I think this type of video is very important. There's going to be a lot of tips today for control, but it will double up for combo as well. I want to give a quick shout out to Rubicon. If you guys have not been to their store already, for the month of November, you can use my code GGYGO to get 5% off a mat in the store. Thank you one last time for just going ahead and sponsoring that tournament. I really appreciate it. Another thing is I am very close to 7,000 subscribers, and I could not be more thankful. Thank you all so very much for that. I'm very excited because at 7,000 subs, I'm actually doing something very special. We're going to be hosting community nights at least once a week for the next, I think, 2 months to watch the entirety of Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. If you're not already in my community, go ahead in the description below, join my Discord, and you'll be able to find the date for that. I will be announcing it soon, but it's just another way for me to meet more of you guys, and we're just going to be watching Yu-Gi-Oh! GX from start to finish, and it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to start dub, we're going to end subbed. I've actually never seen the complete ending or like all the way through, so it'll be a lot of fun for me as well, just because there's still bits and pieces that I just haven't seen yet, but it's going to be a lot of fun, I think. But without further ado, just hop right into the video. So the first thing I want to talk about is know when they're going to make you go first. This is actually a very big thing that I can't exactly explain for you. You just kind of have to know. But I can kind of explain it the best way that I think about it when I'm playing. So I'm going to use Striker as an example for like this whole video because you guys know that I love Striker. It's my most knowledgeable deck. I've been playing it for a very long time. If I'm ever playing against a deck that I see cards in it, like this would be more so like game 2, because like the only time that you'll think that they're gonna make you go first is usually like game 3. I feel is like game 2. If you ever see things like Storm, if you ever see things like Talents can be a big tell, Twins, Dusters, Matched, Dark Ruler. These are cards that will really make or break how game 3 is gonna go if you lose game 2. Because if you go into game 3 and you already know they have cards like Evenly and Storm, I would just expect that I was going to go first. If you're playing against certain blowout decks too, let's say like IDS, Invoked Shadog Dogmatica, I really think that it's important to think too that they have cards like Shadol Fusion, Nadir Servant breaks boards really easily too, between like Natis going like Ecclesia into Fleur being able to attack. All these decks have different ways of breaking a board. So you kind of have to understand that certain decks out there will just make you inherently go first. But it's also kind of hard to tell, and there's not like a really good way for me to explain it other than you going out and playing. But this is another thing where I'm saying, like, if you already play combo a lot, that you should pick up a control deck so you can kind of pick up on instances like this, because it's very rare for combo to get told to go first. It's more so control that gets told this because of cards that are just inherent blowouts. But what do you do whenever you're playing control and you get told to go first, right? It's very different. You avoid the blowout. And I know that sounds a lot easier than it actually is, but it really can be. And I'll tell you a couple different ways that you can play around being blown out. One way that you can do it is side decking cards like Judgment and a Pointer of the Red Lotus. A Point of the Red Lotus will essentially let you look at your opponent's hand and rip a problem card for the time being, which is very important because it also tells you when you can flip all your back row onto what you need to negate, because you get a very clear pathing of their hand and what they could potentially do in their turn. Another thing too is Judgment. It's just very generic. It just hits everything that is going to come down, whether it be a storm, a duster, which to me is very much so a lot of value in one card. So that's why I really enjoy, no matter what you're playing, always having a copy or two of Judgment hanging around, because it's just a very nice thing to be able to slide into, whether it be like a board breaker or what have you. It's just very nice to have. The other way to avoid the blowout, though, that I think is really important and probably one of my number one tips that I can give you: don't set your hand. Keep it small. Keep it like very minimum. What's important about this is that when I'm playing Striker, for example, if I open Tikaboo against Sword Soul, I'm going Shizuku set 1 pass. And the reason being is if it's so like game 1, it's perfectly fine to just like set what you want to set. It's fine. If they're maining the back row outs, then like, yeah, it's unfortunate, but like the percentage of people that actually are right now, it's usually just the Sword Soul players, and it's only like half of them. So I wouldn't even be concerned with it right now. Because like the amount of people that you'll see percentage wise that are main decking back row out is very, very like low. So game 1, feel free to like set what you want to set. Game 2, I'm only setting 1 and passing with Shizuku. And the reason being, though, is because if they have the blowout cards like Duster, Twin, what have you in their hand, they won't activate them. And that seems really vague, but if the more that you play control, the more that you'll realize that this actually just happens. If you don't give them a reason to Duster you, they won't do it, which is crazy. Because like, if you have the Tikaboo, right, you'll flip it when it matters. And cards like the Duster that are just like a normal spell, cards like the Storm that are just like, again, like the normal, they might just hold those. And this is something that you really have to think about because it does happen a lot. And so you don't really want to like commit too much to the board, because when you're playing control, getting those resources back and getting the card advantage back is so hard that if you just maintain it in your hand, a lot of times your follow-up play is just so much better because you didn't lose it all just by setting your hand and getting blown out. I know that some people have varying opinions about that, like, oh, if you get blown out, then you get blown out. But what if I told you that like you can still get hit with the blowout card and live and be fine? And that's because some people get greedy and they want to set their hand. That's why if I ever have like an extra Widow Anchor, I know I said this before, but like if I ever have a Widow Anchor in my hand and I search another one, I'm only setting one of the Widow Anchors because like I don't need to set both. Like if you can play through a negation and interaction and then like ray effect, then I was probably losing anyways. And I feel like that mindset is fine. If you have the other Widow in your hand or the other interactions in your hand, like your more card advantage, then you have more of a way to play back into the board and make it a more back and forth game than just getting blown out and making it one-sided. That's something that you really have to think about in this game. Another thing is siding in cards like Shared Ride, cards like Silent Graveyard even. That's a really forgotten card right now. Dimensional Barrier. Cards that really avoid the blowout in themselves, because even if they have the blowout card, you can just flip it and all of a sudden your opponent's going to pass back to you because it's just a blowout card in return. And that's what I really enjoy about Chainable Back Row, is that this is another thing that you can use to your advantage to play around the big blowout cards, because if they do go like summoning monsters or putting cards in the field, and then they try to like shut down your back row, then it doesn't really matter what else they do, because a lot of their like storms and evenlies are just kind of dead at that point, right? Because they try to establish their own board, so you're already past that initial turn 1 where you might get, or turn 2 rather, that you'd get blown out by those cards, and then you start progressing into the game and start getting into more of a grind. So hopefully that tip in general helped you. That is probably one of the most useful tips that I can give you in this video, or honestly in the past couple, because that is something that I use every single game that I play Striker, because it's so important to not just get absolutely shut down in the first game, or like just right off the rip, especially in game 2, because it can be very tilting too, and we need to prevent that as much as possible. And the next thing is, don't set both floodgates if you have double floodgate in your hand, whether it be to Gozen, to Rivalry, to Tikaboo. If you guys don't know what Tikaboo means, it's just there can be only one. A lot of people get confused about that. I just want to clear that up. But so if you ever have 2 there can be only 1, just set one and hold the other, because if this card gets blown out, or like your entire back row gets blown out, you'd still have one. And a lot of times if you have like if you're playing like Striker, right, and you have Shizuku and a hand trap, a lot of times you'll be fine because you have like Ray Effect to stop an attack with Kaina. You have like your hand trap, and hopefully you'll just be alive. But like if you're gonna get blown out anyways, it's better just to hold it, because either you're going to flip Tikaboo and they're going to lose, or they're going to blow out your back row and then they're going to try to play into your board. So if you live that turn and then you can go ahead and reset the other their chameleon 1, then you'll just win from there, because they have to dig for another back row out, especially if they already used like a storm and now there's cards in their board and they can't out this anymore. It's honestly just insane. So that's another thing just really to think about, is just don't set the second floodgate. Just hold the one and set the other. It'll go a long way, I promise you. The other thing that you can do with having a card like Tikaboo, right? Let's say that you're playing a deck that didn't open very well, but your 2 cards in your hand out of your 5 were Imperm and There Can Be Only One. If you're playing against a deck that you have There Can Be Only One in, right? This is something where you just set There Can Be Only One. You do not set your Imperm, for the same reasoning that I just said. If you flip There Can Be Only One, you're going to win that game. If they're going to blow out your back row, you're going to lose the Imperm anyways. So you just let the There Can Be Only One die, and then you'll automatically have the Imperm in hand live again. And what's important about that is that your opponent has no idea that you have the Imperm, because they would have assumed that you would have set it alongside the Tikaboo. And that is a huge mind game that you can play with your opponent, is that if you don't set the Imperm, there's no way that they would have thought that you had that, because that is just a 5-head play in itself. But so either you're flipping that Tikaboo and they're losing, or they're going to blow out their back row like they would have anyway, and then you have another card interaction in your hand to stop them. So this is a very, very important thing to think about whenever you're going ahead to set all your back row, because you don't really know what's going to happen in games 2 or 3. So this is why you want to hold your card advantage as long as possible. And the other thing is that if you're playing control, please, please, please do not push for the kill shot if you have complete control of the game. There is no reason to do it. I see people do it all the time, and they lose games from it. Please just keep control of the game and whittle your opponent down on resources. They will lose eventually. Do not try to go for the closeout. I see this a lot with Striker too, where they're playing There Can Be Only One against like Sword Soul, and they're just shutting down the game, right? But they're playing Hulk Celine, and Hulk Celine doesn't work under There Can Be Only One because Celine and Veiler are both spellcasters. So they'll go multi-roll, send There Can Be Only One, and then they'll go like access code, and then it'll get like Veilered or Impermed. I see some people go for like big combos and control once they have a lot of card advantage already, and then they get like hit with a lot of effect negation, or like an Ash from the hand, an Imperm, a Veiler, what have you. If you already have complete control, don't even give your opponent a window or a shroud of hope that they can get back into the game. Just keep the pressure on, and it'll be enough to win the game, especially if you have cards like IO. I've seen people blow it. This is a huge thing for playing control. Just keep control of the game as long as possible. Because at that point, if you're already like putting your opponent down off of a floodgate that they can't play the game, the amount of card advantage that you're generating around this card would just be insane. Especially because if you are playing control, I assume that you're already going to have things like Judgment. So you'll already be set up and you'll be fine, but just don't go for the kill shot if you don't need to. This is just another thing, again, that I just see too many people do and they lose because of it. The next thing is don't fear a floodgate or interaction. So cards like there can be only one that is very prevalent in the format right now. Not many decks can actually just play that card, so it's not something that you should actively be scared of. If you're going to be playing things like Sword Soul, understand that you have to respect that card, and you might see it in an event, and you probably will, but the odds that you'll see it a lot aren't very high. Cards like Imperial Order, especially me being a striker player, I have to respect that this card's going to get flipped on me at least 3 to 4 times a tournament because everyone's maining it or they're siding it. So this is something that I have to be very weary of when it comes into playing the events right now. I have to build my side toward that and really understand that this is a card right now. The other thing is cards like Nibiru, if you're playing Hero or Salad. You have to understand that if you see a Salad player hard relink their Sunlight Wolf, they're probably holding a Will and they're ready for a Nibiru, because then they can go Will, bring back Sunlight Wolf, use a field spell now to relink their Wolf and be fine. So this is another thing that we see. People say like, oh, you can't play this deck because this card exists, but you just have to understand that you have to respect the card. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't play the deck, because it's one of those things where if you want to play the deck and you're really good with it, you're really versed, it has a lot of good interactions in the format and it can do really well, you can play the deck. Just understand that you're probably going to get one of these cards dropped into you at least 3 to 4 times, because there's just a lot of people who have it in their side. Some are even maining it. So just keep this in mind whenever you're playing a deck, that you don't necessarily have to fear something, just respect that it's going to be there, but you can still see a lot of success, as we saw Hero for actually a while there, actually doing really well, and it fell off, but I feel like the only reason is because it has a really bad time with Nibiru, but that doesn't mean that it also can't pop off and do well in an event. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. The next thing is learning how to play around talents. Talents is an interesting one because a lot of times they'll do like really weird things to try to bait the talent. I see a lot of people like popping Shizuku when they know I have Ray Engage in Grave, and then I'll just go like Kagari back Engage. But like sometimes they'll try to like 5-head and just not activate Ray Effect, especially if I know I'm not going to die. Because I always end my turn with like trying to get Hornet Drone back in hand, or like making sure I have like a name in hand to like go back into my combos. And what the funny thing is about that is like they will try to like force a talent activation. So they do like really weird things to try to force you to activate a monster effect. So just kind of be weary of that, because that's how you really know that they'll have that. And certain decks like Virtual World just aren't running talents because like they need their engine, they need to not see a brick, right? But you'll see decks like Dragon, Striker, I've seen like some Sun Avalon players playing Triple Tactics. You have to like kind of know the decks that do play it. But there's also just a few, like again, Virtual World just probably wouldn't play this card. And then if you ever see someone activating like really weird effects to try to like bait monster negates, this is probably the reason. This is probably sitting in their hands. So this is another card that you just have to play around. But just know that there are very good telltale signs, like weird monster pops, trying to pop like weird back row too. Like you'll see it a lot, and you'll know what I'm talking about the more that you play against talents. And I recommend that you do play against people who do run talents, just because it gives you a better insight into when you should be activating your effects and when not to. Because again, this is only in the main phase. So if you ever activate cards in the draw phase, in the battle phase, it's just really good ways to play around talents. The next thing I want to talk about is, why do you run 41 cards with Upstart? There's 2 different reasons. One, you're a striker player, and you realize that even if you have 41 cards, Upstart is still an absolutely free spell in the graveyard. You're just dumping it in the grave and drawing a card. It doesn't really matter that you give your opponent 1,000 life points. It's the fact that you have an additional spell in grave right away, and it's really, really good to have. And the other thing for it is that if you ever have a deck where you have a really hard time siding, let's say siding just sucks for you, like it's a really hard time, you never know what to pull out, having the 41st card being Upstart just gives you a very free side out option, and it's just another card that you can use just to take out and put in something more meaningful in, as more so just a placeholder, which I honestly really like the card for it, because it gives you another way to really be like, oh yeah, I can actually like side this in now. I don't have to play like a weird ratio of one of my starters, just to make sure that I also see a side card. So that's why I think this is very important. This is just kind of like a side note, but I do really appreciate this card being in even my deck, being Striker, because again, it's just such a free spell in the graveyard right away. So we have to be thinking about this whenever we see lists running 41 with Upstart. It's probably just because they're having a hard time siding, and that doesn't mean that it's a bad option. I still really enjoy seeing it as a set 41, but it is a very good card to have around. And the next thing is when you are building a deck, you have to understand one very important detail of deck building, and that's what is the deck trying to accomplish. And so whenever you see a deck like Flow Under Ease, right, the harder the win con is to get to, the lower the deck is going to be in tier. So whenever we see Flow Under Ease going off, a lot of times they need a bird and a field spell. Otherwise, if they just have a bird, it's literally lights out after one Veiler, one Imperm, an Ash, like no matter what have you. If they cannot activate the bird's effect to keep summoning, they just lose. So they realistically really need a bird and a field spell 100% of the time. So that's why if the harder the win con, the lower the tier. And Flow Under Ease, once it gets a new spell, it'll be up in tier a little bit because that card's broken. But right now, it's just very hard for them to get to both of these options. So that's why we see it in a lower tier. So that's when you try to figure out, like, what is the deck trying to accomplish and what does that mean for its tier? So basically, what it's trying to accomplish is the win con. And again, with the lower tier with the harder win con. So this is just one thing I wanted to bring up because it's very important when it comes to deck building as well, and something that you really should be thinking about. Again, guys, I am a coach over on Metafy. If you do need a session, definitely go over to my Metafy page. Check it out. It's link in the description below as well. Also, if you're new here, go ahead and join the community. It's just one big testing circle, honestly. A lot of people in there only want to see you do better and only want to see you improve. I really enjoy my entire community. Everyone is very friendly, and I really love the community that I'm building here because it just is a very non-toxic area for you to go to and really feel comfortable in learning the game and your interactions in a deck because it's non-stop deck testing in there, and it's honestly a lot of fun. Also, in my description below, if you want to go ahead and join my Twitter, go ahead and follow. We're trying to get the presence up on the social media just so we can just kind of build another community over there as well. I do hope that you enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Thank you all so very much.